As chairman of the speakers program, I'd like to welcome you to our 10th program of the winter quarter. I've been told by His Excellency that he has a very stimulating talk for us, after which he will be taking questions from the audience. We do have 2 roving mics this time, so if you do have a question, please raise your hand and we'll bring the mic to you so that we can tape the lecture and everyone can hear it throughout the audience. I'd like to introduce Archbishop Fulton Sheen.
Mr. Elias, fellow students, I said absolutely nothing to him about an exciting lecture. I was asked by a reporter in the back what was to be the subject, and I told him. But as regards excitement, I want to tell you about what you may expect. First of all, I was giving a lecture in Philadelphia not so long ago, and I lost my way. And I stopped a couple of boys on the street. And I said, "Which is the way to the town hall?" And they told me the address. I've forgotten, 12th and Chestnut or some such street. "What are you going to do there?" I said, "Give a talk." "On what?" Well, I didn't want to tell them that I was talking on the subject which we will address you today, the accipito frontalis of the convolistic convolutions of the metaphorical obliquarum pelbearum. So I simplified it, and I said, "Well, boys, I'm going to talk on heaven and how to get there. Would you like to come and find out?" They said, "You don't even know the way to the town hall." And I don't know how it can be exciting in the light of an answer of a taxi driver in New York. He said, "I never had an education, never went beyond the 3rd grade, but I carry people who use big words, and I picked up a number of big words." From that moment on, he proceeded to use only polysyllables, and all out of context. As I was getting out of the cab, he said, "I love to hear you on television. You have such a marvelous voice. It has so much animosity in it." Well, I'm going to talk to you today about 3 forms of love. In English, we have only one word for love. I love the Los Angeles Lakers. I love the New York Mets. I love pickles. I love God. You see, it doesn't convey a great deal of meaning. The Greeks had 3 words for it. They had a word for everything. And in order to understand it, I think we have to go back to the Greek and understand their 3 words for love. And when we do, we will understand that it is just not quite simple enough to say, well, if you love anything is all right. So let us take the 3 Greek words for love. The first word is Eros. Eros was that little god carried arrows and shot them into the earth and made the earth fertile. Eros was the god that didn't so much push you, it was something that pulled you on ahead. It made you yearn for the good life, for art, and for science. It was the best of human romantic love. It was Eros, I think, that inspired, it must have been one of the most beautiful of all proposals that were ever written, G.K. Chesterton's proposal to his wife. He said, "4 lamps of thanksgiving are always burning before me. The first, that I have been made out of the same earth as you. 2, I have tried to love everything in the universe as a remote preparation for loving you. And 3, I have never run after strange women. You cannot understand how much this prepares a man for true love. And 4, my previous existence ends here. It has led me to you. That is Eros. Or, I once heard a toast that was paid by a husband to a wife. Now you have to wait until the toast is over, otherwise you'll misunderstand it. And the husband raised his glass to toast his wife, and he said, "Here's to a face that would stop a clock and bid all time stand still, that we might contemplate her beauty." That was Eros. I heard of a husband who was asked, "What would you like to be if you could come back to earth 2 years after you died?" He said, "My wife's second husband." That was Eros. Well, Eros, therefore, was something very good in human love. And then, after the influence of Freudianism, Eros became the erotic. Then it was no longer so much a love of a person. It was the love of the pleasure that a person gave, which is quite different. If there was any symbol for it, it might be the fig leaf. The fig leaf in Greek sculpture covered up the secret parts of man and woman. Today the fig leaf has been put over the face. It doesn't make a great deal of difference who gives the pleasure. Person does not matter. You drink the water and you forget the glass. One finds here, too, a suggestion of a difference in the nature of man and woman in making love. A man can love a part of a woman. A woman generally can love only the whole man. For that reason, a woman is slower to love, and she waits until she can make a total commitment. And the man, however, will talk about parts of a woman. He can love a part, but the woman loves the whole. And so the erotic, therefore, after a time, became almost dissociated from the person and was concerned with a release of tension, rather with a dedication to someone else who would share a common experience. Now this was the first meaning, Greek word for love, and how it changed its form. Now we come to a second. I have to watch my time here. If I've got 3 words to give you, I have to divide them rather equally. The second Greek word you know, Filia, because you know Philadelphia. Adelphos is brother, and Filia, love, and hence the love of a brother. Philanthropic, Filia, love, anthropos, man. And Filia is the love of humanity, a social concern. It's a feeling, a democratic feeling that we're all one. It never picks and chooses among the human beings that it loves. Not one group against another group. It never expresses love for one group by hating another group. Filia is more universal. It was the kind of thing that when Alexander conquered Persia, he asked all of his generals to marry Persian women because he said, "Oh, God is the common father of all men. We're all one." He broke down even national bounds. But to give you some concrete examples of Filia, There was an East Indian by the name of Singh, S-I-N-G-H, who some years ago wanted to go into Tibet. And he hired a Tibetan guide to take him over the Himalayas. After a while, he became tired, cold, and they sat down on rocks covered with snow, and Singh said to the Tibetan guide, "I think I hear moaning down there in the crevice." And the Tibetan said, "Don't be silly." He said, "If there is someone there, we're almost dead ourselves." Well, Singh went down and relieved the man, dragged him down the mountain to a village, cared for him, was rather refreshed by this experience of helping a fellow man, came back and found his friend, who did nothing, frozen to death, resting. Singh was manifesting a Filia. Dostoevsky, the Russian novelist, has a story to illustrate this. It's about a woman in hell. And an angel came to the woman and said, if you can recall a single good thing that you ever did during your life, I will take you out of hell. The old woman said, "I once gave a carrot to a beggar." "All right," said the angel, "I will let down a carrot into hell. And you get hold of the carrot and I'll pull you out." Well, as the woman was being pulled out, many others, of course, saw her being pulled out, grabbed hold of her and the carrot. She said, "Get off, this is for me." And they all fell back. This an absence of Filia. Another example. About 8 or 9 years ago, I was on a plane going from Chicago to New York. And the stewardess, as we took off, sat down alongside of me. A very beautiful young girl. She said, "Do you remember me?" I said, "No, I don't. I ought to, but I don't." "Well," she said, 2 years ago, I met you on this very trip, and I sat with you for 20 minutes, and I remember every word you said." "Well, what did I say?" "Well, you began by saying, 'You are a very beautiful girl.' And did you know that of all the gifts that God gives, the one that he gets back last and least of all is the gift of beauty? He gives song, and people sing for his glory. He gives them money, they use it for the poor. And very often, when he gives beauty, he gets back nothing but a pile of old bones. And since you are so exceptionally beautiful, why don't you give your beauty to people who have never seen anything beautiful?" That's what you said. Well, I said, "That sounds just exactly like me. That's what I would say." "All right," she said, "I've had 2 years to think this over, and I'm willing to do anything. All right, you come to my office in New York, and I will tell you where you are going." "I will tell you now if you want to know." She said, "Tell me now. It makes no difference. My mind is made up." I said, "You're going to a leper colony in Vietnam." So she went to a leper colony in Vietnam. She has a Jeep. She drives it about the roads and searches under bridges where lepers are very often driven when they're chased out of villages, puts them in her Jeep, takes them to a leprosarium, and then with others care for them. And she wrote and said, "I don't know whether they ever think of seeing anything beautiful, but I know I do. I see the beauty of their gratitude and their love." This is Filia. Now there's another word for love, and this is the most important of all. We have no English equivalent for this word. See, we have English equivalents for the first two. The third word is agape, A-G-A-P-E, sometimes pronounced agape, A-G-A-P-E. It was a word that was very seldom used in classical Greek literature. And because it was seldom used, it became an ideal word to seize on and give it an exact meaning. So that when Christ came to this earth and brought a new kind of love, there had to be a new word to describe it. It was a different kind of love. It's very easy to love those who love you. Reciprocated love is easy to take. But to love those who hate, to love in the face of anti-love, is an entirely different kind of love than the first two. So the New Testament writer searched about for a word that would explain this new love of self-giving, and they chose the word agape. And in its verb and in its noun form, it is used in the New Testament 250 times. It was a love that's very difficult to practice, because it never refers principally to the love that is returned. Now, just to give you, want a good gesture? There's one. Here, for example, would be a sample of it. I once received a letter from a girl in television in the East, and she said, I went to my first party at 18. I went with a cousin. I came back. I was left at the front gate. And a distance of about 75 feet separates our front gate from the house. On the way up, I was assaulted. Was found later with child. Nobody believed in me except the pastor and my mother. I was thrown out of the choir of the church. Everybody complained against my mother. Raise fine children. Look at this worthless girl, and on and on. And she said, I'm suffering intensely. What am I to do about it? And I said, you're suffering this way because you took upon yourself the sins of one man. If you took upon yourself the sins of 10 men, I imagine that you'd suffer 10 times more. And if you suffered and took upon yourself the sins of 100,000 men, you might have a bloody sweat. And she said, this is the first time I began to understand the agape of Christ. This was a new kind of love. Now let me tell you how I failed that love once. I was visiting a leper colony in Baluba, Africa. And I had with me 500 little silver crucifixes about 1.5 inches high. I was going to give one to each of the 500 lepers. The first leper who came out held out his left hand. His right hand was off the elbow, eaten by leprosy. He held out his left hand. It was the most foul, fetid, noisome mass of corruption I ever saw. And I held the crucifix above it, and I dropped it. I dropped it. And it was swallowed up in that volcano of corruption. And all of a sudden, there were 501 lepers in that camp. I was the 501st, for I'd taken this symbol of God's identification with man and refused to identify myself with someone who was 1,000 times better on the inside than I was. Then there came over me the awful thing that I had done. And then I dug my fingers into his hand and pulled out the cross from the leprosy and pressed it to his hand, and so on for all the 500 other lepers. And in that failure I came to understand, faintly and dimly, something of what agape means. Or to give another symbol of it, imagine a judge, father, has before him a son who committed murder. There's no doubt whatever about the guilt of the son. The father sentences him to death. Immediately after doing so, the father steps down and says to the son, all right, now I will take your punishment. This would be mercy. A reconciliation of justice and mercy. But let us change the figure a bit. Suppose that at the moment that the son was condemned to death for murder, the murdered boy walks in alive. Convicted boy would say, well, how can you condemn me of murder? Where is the corpus delicti? You say I've killed him, see he's alive. Now that's what agape is. Agape is a readiness to die for another, and when he who died rose from the dead, then we can say, I'm guilty, I'm a sinner, I deserve death. Look, he's alive. I demand to be free. That's the fulfillment of agape. That's love in its perfection. It's a love that is not... How many minutes do I have? I want to listen. I was once heard a professor of Scripture talking on 12 minor prophets of the Old Testament. He had finished 3 after an hour and 45 minutes. He had 9 to go. He saw his audience was getting a bit tired. He felt that he should introduce the next one with some degree of histrionics. And he said, and now, where shall I place Habakkuk? Someone got up in the back of the hall and said, he can take my seat. Here's an example of agape. One of the greatest men that I ever met in my life, without doubt, is Richard Wormbrand, who's down in Glendale, California now. 14 years in a communist prison in Romania. 3 years in a pit 30 feet deep. Unbelievable tortures. And his wife was in prison for 7 years. For what? Well, for preaching agape. That was really it, in prison. But before he went into the communist prison, a German soldier came to his home. He said to the German soldier, how many Jews have you killed? Oh, he said 20 or 30,000. Where did you kill them? Everywhere. Name some towns. In this particular town here, how many did you kill? He said, I killed every Jew. Wormbrand said to him, who was himself a born Jew, do you have any sense of guilt? No, he said. Do you think a time may come when you will ever demand forgiveness? He said, I don't believe in it. I don't believe that kind of love exists in the world, of returning love for hate. Wormbrand said, all right, let's prove it. In that room there is my wife, Sabina. She's asleep. She has not heard this conversation. You mentioned that you killed every single Jew in that particular town. That's her town. You killed her father, her mother, her brother, her 3 brothers, her 3 sisters. Let's see if she has any agape in her heart. He called his wife out into the room and said, Sabina, this is the Nazi who killed your family. She looked at him for a moment, threw her arms around his neck, kissed him, and said, as the Lord forgives you, so do I. That is agape. That is love. So you see, there's a variety of loves. And any love that we have here on this earth is only a fraction. Every woman promises a man that which only God can give. And every man promises a woman a love that only God can give. Because here on earth there's this tension of the chase and the capture. There's a great joy in the romance, the chase. There's a great joy in the capture and the life together. But one ends the other. The only way there can be a reconciliation is when one captures the infinite, and then it will take an eternity of chase to ever sound its depths. And we come then to the meaning of the human heart. The human heart is not perfect in shape and contour like a Valentine heart. There's a small piece missing out of the side of every human heart. And that may be to symbolize the piece that was torn out of the universal heart of humanity on the cross. But I think the real meaning is that when God made the heart of each and every one of you, found it so good and so fine, so noble, that he kept a small sample of it in heaven. He sent the rest of it into this world where you would roam about trying to fill up that heart with all the love you could, and yet never being perfectly happy, perfectly contented, totally in love, until you went back again to God to recover the peace that he has been keeping for you from all eternity. Thank you.
If you have a question, would you please raise your hand and we'll bring a mic to you. We have some time left. There's a question over there. Somebody get a mic there, please. Right. Anybody? There.
Yes, I'd like to ask you if you ever heard of a Jewish man named Lenny Bruce.
Did I ever hear of a Jewish man by the name of Lenny Bruce?
Yes.
I can't recall.
Well, he was known as a sick comedian, and was really quite a controversial figure at the early part of the 60s. And he did a comedy routine, which was titled Christ and Moses. And it seems they returned to New York, and they don't really know what to do or where to go, but they hear at Sheen and Spellman or at St. Peter's. And they get there, and they talk about how this whole promise of love that is preached. And suddenly the figures, you and Cardinal Spellman, find out that Christ and Moses are in the back. He says, well, which ones are they? Well, they're the ones that are glowing. And Christ listens to what you have to say, and he can't understand something, because it seems that his road took him through Spanish Harlem, and Sheen's got a ring on his finger that's worth $6,000, and he just quite couldn't figure that out. This strange distribution of wealth, this ornate cathedral, the whole thing. And I'd just like you to comment on what you think of that.
Well, listen, inasmuch as we're in fictitious stories, I will comment on it with another story.
But it is symbolic, is it indeed?
Well, Ora, you develop the symbolism then.
No, I asked you. If you could, please.
First of all, I didn't hear you too well. I didn't understand things that you said. Sometimes the microphone was too far from your face. Could you understand everything?
No.
No.
Oh, well, maybe I can clarify it to you. The main idea of it is that Christ and Moses went through the most wretched conditions in New York City in order to get to this ornate cathedral. And Christ was perplexed. He couldn't understand what was happening. This could exist by those that profess to have love. Now, do you understand what I was talking about?
I don't understand what you're talking about. I understand what you say now. Yes.
Comment on that for us.
Yes. The implication, apparently, of what you were saying is, how can there be love when there's wealth in the face of the poor? There is not great wealth. I mean, there's not great love. Certainly not. I agree with you. I have no quarrel with you on that point.
He also said one other thing. He said any priest that owns more than a single suit is a hustler. Because if he's got, there's people around, there are people around that have no suits.
Oh, that owns more than a single
Yes.
suit.
Yes.
Is a hustler.
Yes.
Backing down in the face of reality.
What is your answer to that?
Oh.
That's very very
I have nothing to say to that. Our blessed Lord said, if you have two suits, give the one. Sure.
Yeah, all right. Among the man who professes to have the great love, as you seem to have.
Yes.
How many suits do you own?
All right. Come here, I'll tell you something. All right, now you go back to your seat and I'll talk to you. I have another suit, I'll tell you that, for one to begin with. But you find someone who received $36,000 an hour on television, a half hour, $36,000 every half hour, over a period of years, and who received, in addition to that, many gifts from people that totaled $10 million, and never kept 1 cent of $10 million, but gave it all to the poor of Africa and Asia, and you have someone who's entitled to the second suit.
Can we have another question, please? Right here. Can we make it short this time?
Yes, of course. Referring to your talk which you just gave, you stated that women love men as a total man and men love women in parts. I think I might have been true in the past, but I doubt it's true now, especially with this advent of woman's liberation. As, for instance, as a woman's personality and character is being developed along with a man. So I think up to date, I would disagree with you on that point. And on your story on the woman who was being lifted up and was leaving behind all her fellow associates or fellow men, and then everybody dropped back down. What was the point of that? What should she have done? Or what were you trying to say?
Which one, the stewardess?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, not the one with a carrot.
The carrot.
Excuse me.
Oh, well, the point of that story very obviously was that you must not be just trying to save yourself alone. You've got to try to save fellow man. And
Well, I was trying to find out the symbolism. What were you trying to say in this particular case? You were drawing a case history here.
I was giving an example of Filia.
Yes, I understand
that you have to love
but
fellow man.
What should she have done in this case?
Said, all right, come along, brothers, come along.
Everybody on one.
Sure,
oh.
everybody get on. Climb on board, everybody.
Okay,
And then
now-
as regards your first point,
Yeah,
you simply
your
say
first
that
point.
I am not up to date in my understanding of the nature of man and woman. I blush with embarrassment at my antiquity, and I give way to your superior understanding of the present day young man and woman.
in what a manner you could stop communistic or Nazist hate with Agape? Then my father is, or other families members are murdered by communists. How I could we will something help that's when I love Stalin?
Yes. First of all, you are evidently a man who has come out from all of the tortures of those totalitarian regimes. The answer, however, is to be found in the fact that we hate the system. We love the person and pray for the person. Wurmbrand, for example, as soon as he was released after 14 years of torture in this communist prison, went to the grave of the communist torturer who did the most harm to him. He had died during his 14 years. And Wurmbrand went to his grave to pray for him at his grave. This is merely a continuation of the lesson of the gospel. The Lord hates sin, but he loves the sinner. And this is the only answer that there is. You see, Mrs. Wurmbrand was a perfect example of the forgiveness of the murderers, forgiveness of the man, but the continuing hatred of Nazism.
I'd like to ask the last question. I was wondering, what is the Vatican doing right now as far as helping the Soviet Jews in Russia in terms of Agape?
Yes, the question is asked about helping the Soviet Jews. I'm giving a talk in Chicago this coming month with Rabbi Tannenbaum on Soviet Jewry. I'm going to be in touch with him before I give the talk in Chicago to find out what can be done, and we'll not only be interested in Soviet Jewry, but we'll be interested in men like this one here, who has also suffered persecution, particularly the Baptists, who are suffering intensely in Russia. In other words, against everyone who's suffering. And so I will raise my voice, indeed, against Soviet persecution.
What progress has been done so far? I mean, has there been anything? Has the Vatican come out with anything yet? I mean, or are they just thinking about it?
Yes, I think there has, because the man who is the greatest specialist in the persecution behind the Iron Curtain is Michael Bordeaux of Oxford. And Michael Bordeaux, in his last book, has mentioned the fact that the protest that had been coming from America against the persecution of Soviet Jewry has already had its effect.
Thank you very much.